Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Student Impact Report brought to you by the Student Basic Needs Coalition. I'm Taylor Allgood, joining you from Washington, D.C., and I'm joined this season by Owen Tanner-Flomberg, co-founder and co-executive director of SBNC. Hey, Owen.
Hey Taylor, glad to be here again. I'm excited to chat today. Lots going on as always.
Yes, I always say there's not a shortage of news. But to hear more about Owen's background and his work with SBNC, I did introduce him in the first episode, which we released last week, and you can view that on our Spotify and YouTube pages. So be sure to check that out. But without further ado, did you want to jump into the topic of the week?
Yeah, let's jump into it.
So this week, I wanted to focus on a particular article that I read that came out of Inside Higher Ed, talking about free speech and student journalism kind of being under fire right now at Indiana University. And so at Indiana University, administrators recently suspended print publication of the Indiana Daily Student, which is the campus newspaper, and consequently fired its advisor after he reportedly, refused to censor a homecoming edition of the paper. So, according to Inside Higher Ed, university officials told the paper that it could only publish content related to homecoming in this edition and no traditional front page news coverage. And so when the advisor apparently resisted, he was then terminated and the print edition was then shut down. So free speech advocates, including the folks at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, and the Student Press Law Center, are calling this a textbook case of censorship. And it has kind of, reignited this conversation and this concern around First Amendment protections on college campuses. So, kind of have a few questions. I want to pick your brain on this topic and, kind of understand what you feel and what you think this says about free speech and student voice in higher ed right now. So, the first question I kind of want to talk about is that one of the most striking details, I think, in this article is that administrators, reportedly want to censor the paper to protect the university's image during homecoming week, which to some may be understandable. And so, how common, I guess, do you think this tension is between, on one hand, universities and university leadership wanting to manage their reputation and their image during a high traffic time like this, and also students wanting to continue to push out their journalism and tell their truth? Where do you think that line is, or where do you think it should be drawn?
Yeah, well, this case is, I think very striking given like how much of the uh, alleged censorship here has been documented and has really been done in, almost full daylight. So I think this is why this story has really kind of taken on a life of its own, gotten a lot of attention of what's happened at this university in Indiana. But I think to your point, Taylor, this happens everywhere. I think there are, and we're seeing, little stories here and there popping up about, student papers being told to censor some of the content that they're putting in their paper or maybe on their online website or other vehicles that they're distributing content. But I think what I'm even more concerned about is the chilling effect that's going on with these student papers. These student papers, as we'll talk about, I think in some of the later parts of this segment, are under extreme financial pressure. And just like how I think the larger long form kind of journalism and like media space, like outside of campuses, is under a lot of pressure right now, just due to economic changes. And this is not a new story. This has been going on for, since the the advent of the internet here, as we as a society have really shifted the ways that we intake news content or news information. That's shifted a lot with social media, the internet, et cetera. And we don't need to go through all of that. And I think most people are aware that, newsrooms, local newsrooms are struggling right now, and they have been for a long time. And I think thinking about campus papers like a local uh, uh, newsroom is a really great way of thinking about them. They often operate, or at least used to operate, with a lot of independence from their university that was really built into their structure. But I think as they become more reliant on institutional funding, as like advertising revenues for these campus papers have really taken a nosedive, just like the industry as a whole. It makes it harder for these papers to have that independence that they once had because uh, they're more reliant on financial support from their institution. So I think it's kind of the perfect storm right now is for like the past, couple decades, decade and a half. These papers have lost their financial independence in a lot of ways, these campus papers. And now with I think everything going on with the administration and what's going on in some state governments, there's this additional pressure that the institutions are able to put on these student journalists to prevent them from speaking the truth that they, have researched, and it's their job and their duty to share that with their campus communities. And I think to take a step back here, the article that caused this whole problem at Indiana University was an article that the paper was going to run about how, and it's quite ironic how their campus was ranked very poorly on FIRE, one of the organizations involved here's kind of index of free speech and like how much free speech is acceptable on campuses. So this was the article that these journalists, these really brave journalists, student journalists at this school, were going to be sharing with their campus community, I think, to really raise awareness about the dangers that their paper and other mechanisms of free speech on their campus, how that they're really under siege right now. And I get why the paper would want to do that, whether it's homecoming or not, when they're publishing that article. But quite ironic, I guess, is that this is the article that has caused all these problems. It's an article saying that the school is not respecting free speech in comparison to other institutions across the country.
Yeah, well, we know that, Indiana University is not the only example of this across the country. And like you said, this story is not new. I've heard similar stories to this, uh, even as early as 2022, which I know is still not that long ago. But um, you know, given that this is at other universities as well, like earlier this year at Purdue University, I know there was an article about that as well, where, kind of universities have pulled back this support from student media, financial or otherwise, or impose new restrictions on campus speech. Um, do you think that we're entering a new era of institutional overreach when it comes to student expression? And if so, what do you think is driving that shift? Because it seems like it's not just journalism now. It seems like um, many different ways of expression, whether it's chalking, protesting on campus, like all of these things, I think simultaneously institutions are kind of having more of a say in that. So do you think this is a new trend or a new era?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And, it's really unfortunate because I think one of the places within our society that like higher education institutions are really supposed to fill that that niche that they play in our society is really being these beacons of free expression and free speech. And this is where, you know, young people, students, are really supposed to be able to come onto these campuses and learn about these really fundamental principles of free expression that are so important to how our country works, how we want our society to work. Um, and when you take that away, I think it really stunts students' ability to learn these important practices around free expression. And that's going to hinder them for the rest of their life unless they get other opportunities to kind of learn and hone these skills. And like I didn't mention it in the first question, I was very involved with my student paper on campus at the University of Tennessee, where I went to undergrad. And I think it was such a great experience to learn about um, kind of how the press works, how freedom of expression works, how you're able to. I did a couple different things at the paper, but I did some op-eds or letters to the editor sometimes, and those would spur debate. Some of the ideas I put in my stuff were probably good, some were bad, and there was a dialogue that used to happen. And um like I think a lot of that was fading. Like even when I was an undergrad, I started undergrad in 2016. And I think, attributable in part to the diminished like stature that these papers have kind of in their campus communities. Uh, because, and that social media replaced a lot of it. I think, the shift from print to online. When I started on my campus, there was a print campus paper every single day of the week. By the time I left, I think it was just once a week. Um, and I think that really changes how people perceive the paper and its ability to share reporting. Um, so, like, I really do worry about, not only, student papers, but also other forms of expression, like you outlined, Taylor. And I think it is really important for students to lean in even further and really, uh, test those limits, practice their free expression skills, and like we don't see all institutions, I think, backtracking on this. I think we see some. I think we see some very notable examples, but there are a lot of institutions that have really rejected, I think, this trend, even though it is a trend. But I think there are a lot of institutions out there um, that come to mind that have kind of strengthened the independence or financial stability of their, student media, their campus papers, have invested a lot in helping young journalists, be able to adjust, not just learn the old techniques of journalism, but learn more about video and content and the way that that works on social media. And I think those are good examples of campuses that are kind of bucking that trend. But I do think you're right. I do think there is this trend of uh, a real crackdown on free expression. And then on top of that, it's not just everything that gets cracked down on, it's the silence that each of these big incidents foster. Because students in the future at this campus are going to think twice, or this paper is going to think twice, for better or worse, about what they publish and the ramifications that may have on its relationship with this institution.
Well, I know, SBNC's work centers largely on student voice and student agency. And so kind of to the point of the chilling and the rippling effects that, these incidents can cause across the country and at other places and other institutions. How do you see this, you know, this example of censorship or this kind of censorship impacting students' willingness to speak out on any campus issues, whether it's about basic needs, federal policy decisions, even administrative accountability? what do you think are some of the effects for students who are seeing this and may now be hesitant to share their thoughts?
Yeah, well, very fortunately, and like this is great, good news, I feel like, even though this topic is really scary, we haven't really seen that with many of the students that we're working with. And we work on a variety of different campuses, everything from 2-year and technical schools to 4-year schools, private schools, public schools. Um, in red states, blue states, purple states. And we have not noticed any big trends of students being afraid to advocate for their peers around their basic needs, work to enroll their peers in public benefits such as SNAP or Medicaid. Um, but I do worry, if these trends continue, that could start to seep into other areas of campus and other areas of like campus activism and awareness, like the space that we operate in on like the college affordability and basic needs side of things. But very fortunately, like I think our students are that are going around their campuses having conversations with their peers about these issues are really brave, and I don't think we say that enough. But I think they're even it takes an even greater level of bravery right now to kind of go out there on their campus and do the work that they do with us. And we work with a lot of student governments too. And I think trying to connect our work to these larger entities on campus, I think gives students more legitimacy, gives students more confidence to do the work that we're trying to do, because it ultimately shouldn't be that controversial. To work to enroll your peers in public benefits they're eligible for, but the world's changing really quick. And yeah, I really hope what we have seen in our space continues, and students continue on in all spaces on campus pushing back against these trends.
That's a good point. Thanks for framing that in a more positive way. I think
Yeah,
it's
I'm
easy to
like,
read the news sometimes and be like, ah, like
yeah,
is this going to start spiraling into other campuses and stuff? But it's nice to know that, students are still staying, committed to the mission and their vision for what their campus should look like.
yeah, and college campuses are incredibly complicated. There are lots of different groups, lots of different actors, going back to I studied political science in undergrad, and there's this concept of like pluralism, which means that when there is a society and there's lots of groups that have their own power, it can really uh, help to push back against, attacks on basic freedoms, because there's a lot of different buckets of or loci of power on the campus, where these different organizations organize themselves and work together. So it's like while these stories about like this paper have, percolated into like the mainstream press and people are learning about this, it doesn't really reveal kind of all the complexities and all the different student groups and actors kind of underneath the surface that are pushing back on some of these trends. I imagine there's probably a lot of conversations going on in the student government on that campus and other big groups. And I've even seen some students, I know some students at uh, Indiana University even post about this, which I thought was really heartening to see that they're not involved on like the press side of things, these students that I know, but speaking out about this and, really, I think drawing a very moderate, line in the sand to say, hey, this is not acceptable for the institution to be this involved in the editorial choices of our paper.
Hmm. Well, I know maybe some of this, uh, worry might stem from the fact that this article comes at a time when there is definitely broader criticism of federal and state involvement, um, in campus free speech and really free speech across the board, including, the obvious pressure on universities to control certain types of speech. I saw some of the compacts that
Yeah.
whole thing extended to certain universities.
Which
Uh,
pause there for 1 second is like these compacts. I don't know if folks have been following this. They really should take a look at this. The TLDR on these compacts is basically the Trump administration went to, I think it's about 12 or 15 schools. We'll have to fact check this.
yeah.
Um, and basically gave them this list of demands of things that they need to change about internal processes and procedures to align with the Trump administration's view of how higher education should work. And by and large, I think all the institutions that were provided this, or the vast majority of them, have already rejected it, full out and said, hey, this is not going to fly. And I think, these institutions that were given this ultimatum or these demands as part of this compact are very high ranked, well regarded institutions, but they're not like the same couple institutions, those Ivy Leagues that were targeted earlier this year. And it's really heartening to see, I think, these institutions, pushing back and saying, hey, this is not how higher education is supposed to work in our country. This is not how a democracy is supposed to function. um, a lowercase L liberal democracy is supposed to function. Um, and yeah. So just flagging that, make sure if you haven't, taken a look at this story, it's really fascinating. I think it's going to continue to develop. But I just wanted to take a little aside right here to talk about the compacts.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. I didn't provide much context on that, as I'm still trying to understand it myself. But yeah, I was seeing some of those articles come through about places like University of Virginia, MIT, I believe, as part of some of those schools who are pushing back and putting their foot down on that. But as you touched on, how do these current political dynamics, how might that complicate how campuses and universities can genuinely uphold the First Amendment when, you have federal policymakers and federal leadership basically asking them to crack down on this? It seems kind of challenging in that way.
Yeah, and it is, and it kind of puts these institutions between a rock and a hard place. Is as institutions within, like I said, a lowercase L liberal democracy, they're really supposed to be fostering these, freedom of expression on their campus in a variety of different ways. And when you have the institution, or those in power, or sorry, not the institution, but the administration and those in political power, either at the state level or at the federal level, attempting to withhold funding from these schools, they are, like I said, really put between a rock and a hard place because, on one hand, I think these schools know what they're supposed to be doing and what their expectation uh, is, and what our society's expectation is for higher education, being that, you know, beacon of freedom of expression within their communities, within their states. But on the other hand, higher education has been very much commodified, as as we talk about with SBNC sometimes, and it's that credential that is the key for students, and why most students seek out this credential, that this degree from institutions, is to get a job and to be prepared for the workforce. And we have a rapidly changing economic situation going on as our society grapples with the ramifications of AI coming onto the scene and changing the way that the workforce works in a practical sense, but also how it's designed and structured. And you're seeing a lot of like entry level positions being removed that would be filled by recent grads. So these institutions must really find themselves in the situation here of like, great, we can stand up for our freedom of expression rights that we have. We can go to court and challenge this. But what's the impact on the day to day of the students we're supposed to be serving and getting these credentials so that they can uh, continue on their life and continue on their career and build the life that they want to build for themselves. And when they are rejecting funding, or potentially endangering funding that they receive, that can really jeopardize that practical mission of these schools. So yeah, so I think it's really an impossible situation for many institutions. I know when some of like the first kind of Ivy League institutions were getting this pushback from the Trump administration, a lot of commentators would say, well, hey, they're not really between a rock and a hard place in the same way because they have these giant endowments that they can, take money out of and help get them through the next couple years until hopefully there's a administration or Congress acts to prevent this from happening. But some of these other institutions uh, don't have, they have big endowments, but not a Harvard size endowment. So I do think it puts them in a more challenging space, and it's going to be interesting to see how this continues to play out. Um, Up in especially up through the midterms here over the next year. Yeah, we're about a almost year and 2 weeks out from the midterm elections.
Yeah, thanks for providing some of that context. Just kind of zooming out a little bit from this article in particular and thinking more broadly about uh, free speech on campus. What steps do you think universities should take to maybe rebuild some of this faltering trust and reaffirm their commitment to free speech, not just in response to recent controversies, but as just part of building and rebuilding the everyday campus culture?
Yeah, um I feel like lots of people have probably lots of different ideas on how to do this. I think that the one idea that I would really focus on is um really trying to invest more into campus life. And what that looks like is, I think, either allocating or reallocating additional student fee money to organizations like the student government on these campuses, entities like the student media office. And it wouldn't take, a ton of money when you're looking at the budgets of these campuses. They're huge, huge. These institutions have massive budgets, and it doesn't take millions and millions of dollars to even a few $1,000s, further invested in these parts of campus or student groups on campuses. Um, I think goes a really, really far way in achieving the things that you just talked about is, rebuilding trust and rebuilding and fostering a community of free expression, building more community on campuses. One of these days, we're going to have to talk about the loneliness epidemic among young people and college students. But I think, further investment in student groups, student organizing, student activities is a way to address those concerns and more. And something that I think schools should really think about, even though I know funding is tight right now on campuses. Um, I think where there are places to squeeze some money out, there always is. And I think, and campuses all have some discretionary budgets, their chancellors or presidents do, that they could, invest in, student activities and student organizations like that.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I think that's a good place to leave off on for our conversation today. But I wanted to ask, before we close out, do you have any final remarks or last closing remarks, updates, anything that you want to share before we transition to the student interview?
No, I guess just one last thing that I want to highlight is I know I said this earlier, but it's not all doom and gloom. I really think a lot of campus administrators, faculty, staff, students, offices on campus, student groups are really pushing back against this when it happens and are pushing for more freedom of expression, on campuses across this country. So I just want to really shout out all the folks on campuses across the country that are doing this important work at a really, really hard time here. And I think they're very much on the, the right side of history. And I think in the end here, when we get to the other side of maybe this time period, it's going to be a very cool opportunity to rethink the higher education institution and make sure that there are more safeguards put in place to protect students and free expression moving forward. So that's some, I know we talk a lot about a doom and gloom on this podcast because there's not a lot of good news right now, but especially in the higher ed context, but something that I want to highlight that makes me excited for the future when sometimes it's hard to be.
Absolutely. And that's a good note. I'll be sure to include some positive news, sprinkle it in
Yeah,
some of our
yeah.
episodes, because there is a lot to look forward to, and there's a lot of great things still happening in the higher ed landscape. So definitely going to be talking about some of that in the future.
Wonderful. Well, I will talk to you next week, Taylor.
Alrighty. Well, stay tuned, everyone, because next up I'm talking to Chloe Shomo, a fourth year student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, dedicated to addressing student basic needs through her work with UW-Madison Student Government Association and the Open Seat Food Pantry on her campus. You don't want to miss it. All right. So in this episode of the Student Impact Report, I'm joined by Chloe Shomo, a fourth year student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a dedicated advocate for student basic needs. Chloe serves with the Associated Students of Madison, in other words, UW-Madison Student Government, and helps lead the Open Seat Food Pantry, an entirely student-run pantry on her campus. Through her work, Chloe has helped shape several key initiatives at UW-Madison, including the implementation of a basic needs case manager, the launch of the Campus Basic Needs website, a university-wide survey on student needs, and an interactive resource map highlighting food and essential services across campus. Chloe's advocacy is rooted in her own lived experience with food insecurity, which sparked her passion for addressing barriers to student access. In this conversation, she shares how the open seat has evolved to meet rising needs, the challenges international students and student leaders face, and how activism and research intersects in her work. So, despite the systemic challenges she confronts, Chloe brings a message of community, hope, and action to the movement for student food justice. Welcome, Chloe.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Awesome. So I want to just dive into some questions. You have a super impressive bio, and I would love to learn more. So I know that you've been deeply involved in basic needs advocacy on your campus for some time now. So can you start by just telling us more about your own experience with food insecurity and how that may have shaped your path into this work?
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that question. So, I'm gonna rewind, I would say back to my freshman year. So, attending the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I am on full scholarship. We have this really great program here, and it's called Bucky's Tuition Promise. And basically, for in-state students who are below a certain income threshold, the university and the state promises to meet all the needs of students attending the university. So that's tuition, housing, food. It's the whole package, and it's a really, really amazing program. So I started off my freshman year, and I was staying in the dorms, and I was eating the dorm food. I had the Go 10 plan, which means 10 meals a week were provided to me, which isn't all of them because I couldn't afford the better package. But, you know, life and food access was like pretty great, honestly. So then coming into my winter break of my freshman year, so at UW-Madison, this is about a month-long period from about middle of December to middle of January, and for me, just going home to stay with my family, like it is for a lot of students, wasn't an option for me. So in order to stay in the dorms, it cost about $500, and they let me know about this cost only a couple weeks before, and I was like, shoot. Okay, so I scrambled. I scrambled a lot to come up with the $500. And then once winter break actually started, I had just gone through finals and I wasn't paying attention to my email. But over that winter break period, the dining halls aren't open at all. Until maybe, I guess, a few days before the school opens back up. So it's like December 22nd. I'm like, there's a winter storm at this point, and I'm like, shoot, the dining halls are closed. And I'm on campus where I don't have a car, and the options of grocery stores near me are super unaffordable. And so, yeah, I mean, I think during that time as well, or I know during that time as well, a lot of the student organizations like the Open Seat Food Pantry or Food Recovery Network, who typically provide students with free, accessible, great meals and food, they close down because their students go home who are running those programs. So during that time, I really struggled with food access. I experienced probably one of the more extreme forms of food insecurity I ever had in my life. I was eating just a couple meals a day sometimes, and one of those meals was often a like little microwave ramekin of those mac and cheese cups. And so yeah, and then that experience I think was also really tough because it was really lonely in the dorms. I also really struggled to find other resources off campus or find solutions to accessing affordable groceries. So I had that really tough experience, and then I kind of went into my second semester and I didn't really talk about it because I was kind of ashamed about that experience. It kind of felt like the onus was on me to access food and to have money to purchase groceries on campus and stuff like that, and I was really embarrassed that I wasn't able to meet my basic needs. So I kind of kept that experience to myself except for a couple close friends, and I kind of just accepted it as, you know, a reality of being a low-income student on campus. And then fast forward to my sophomore year, fall semester, I joined the student government intern program, and they kind of ask you, they're like, hey, what's a problem on this campus, and like, what's a problem you can change on campus? And I'm just like a little sophomore, so I'm like, what do you mean I can change something on this campus? Like, what do you mean? So anyways, I thought about my winter break experience, and I thought back on, you know, kind of some of the promises that were made to me coming here as a low-income student. And I said, you know, I realized through the community that I was working with in community activism that that experience wasn't okay, and I didn't want that experience for any other students. So then I kind of began my passion project around increasing food access over winter break. And that kind of led me into the work I do today. So yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for opening up and sharing that story because, you know, I think it just highlights an often overlooked part of the college experience, which is, you know, students come from all different backgrounds, including, you know, financial backgrounds and the ability to afford college in and of itself. That presents challenges for students. And I think there's such like I don't know, like a stereotype, if you want to call it that, you know, if you're in college, you must be able to afford your basic needs. You must be able to, you know, afford XYZ, not realizing the many layers to that and the huge investment that a lot of students need and have to make just to make it through. And so I really love that you highlighted kind of how your own experiences were starting to form the way and shape the way that you were thinking about advocacy on campus. And I know after reading your bio that you're part of the team that helped launch some pretty impressive initiatives on campus. We mentioned the basic needs website, the survey, the resource map, and the addition of a basic needs case manager. Can you break down some of these projects and explain like what the process for those looked like?
Yes, yeah. So I'll start with the resource map because that is probably one of the earlier initiatives. So as part of my winter break advocacy project, I found that there was a lot of off-campus resources that were available, but students were, like myself, were very limited in their knowledge about those resources because campus wasn't sharing information or accurate information about what was available. And also, as a student, you're kind of like limited in how you can get around, right? You're often limited by like the bus schedule. And so it originally started as this big Google Doc of resources that were available over winter break, and myself and a couple other amazing students, we worked on that and we made it available to all the students who were staying over winter break. But it was like kind of burdensome. It was like a 27-page resource document. It was really hard to organize by location or the type of resource you were looking for. So then fast forward a little bit later, I think like a year later or so actually, but we were working with this other student advocate, and he's a medical student. He does some really great work, and he was saying that med students really struggle to access food because of their location on campus. They're a bit further from main campus, and the resources are more limited over there. And so we were like, what if we did a resource map? It's not going to increase the amount of resources that are available, but it'll help students organize by their location and stuff like that. So then we developed the resource map, and I did it as like an independent project with my food pantry at the Open Seat. So I mostly did it, and I had a lot of support doing it, so that was great. But some of the things I really love about the map is that it organizes by resource type. So if you're a student in the dorm who doesn't have access to a lot of cooking materials, you can find ready meals where they'll serve it to you, and it's super great. Or if you're someone looking for like a pantry type of resource where you're looking just to access some groceries, it's organized by that. And then there's also some other resources on there that students might not know about, because a big thing we find on all campuses is that a really big barrier for accessing resources is the awareness piece. So the map is also a kind of tool to combat that. If you're probably looking for one resource, you're probably interested in knowing about all the different resources. So we even have like SNAP on there, because even though it's not physically available in a location, I just want to make sure if you're looking for a food pantry, you might want to know about SNAP. So yeah. And then I can get into the map as well, but I want to pause for a moment. Or not the map, sorry, the website.
Yeah, I was just one follow-up question on that. Like, I'm guessing it's an online map, or like, is it something that you can view online, or is it more like a PDF file? Like, how did you work to create that?
Totally. So it's a super cool thing. You can just do it on Google Maps. So if you look up Google My Maps, you can create your own custom maps. And so you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can even click on a location and get directions. And it works really well on a laptop. It does not work super well on the phone. I'll just say that. But it is now embedded in the Basic Needs website. And so folks can kind of look at it. And I think, you know what, I'm just going to go check really quick. But the last time I checked, this fall semester one had over like 25,000 views, or like last
Oh,
year's one.
wow.
But now I'm going to go
That is
check it.
such a great idea. Like, I'm taking notes myself as someone who manages a campus food pantry. I'm like, that is an incredible idea. And that's so resourceful, because Google is a widely available resource, at least on the internet. I know there's, of course, the digital divide and like, challenges to internet access, but, in general, just the fact that Google is widely accessible with internet access, I feel like that's a great idea.
Yeah, and then I'm just gonna add a couple of things. No, I would be so happy to work with you on this because it genuinely only took me about 10 hours. I already had the list of resources available, but typically one of your community organizations will have a list of resources, and it's super easy to adopt that into a map. But yeah, so the map itself has 66,000 views, which is super cool. Uh,
Wow, that is incredible.
So I'm happy about that. And then another update, this wasn't from me, but the Basic Needs student team, they also added microwave location. So if you're a commuter student or you're packing your lunch or you're looking for a microwave, that is also available on the map. So
And how
um,
many years has this been up?
we published it last fall, it sounds like. Yeah.
Wow.
So a year, a little over a year.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, it's pretty cool and yeah.
And what
Sorry.
about some of the, no, no worries. And what about some of the other resources you mentioned? You don't have to go like into all of them too deeply if you don't want to, but I'm curious just about like the basic needs case manager. Like, what is that? I know that the Open Seat is largely student run, but is this a staff member? Is this a student? What does that look like?
So definitely. So um, coming out of my winter break project, I entered my spring semester my sophomore year. So this was like a little over a year and a half ago. Um, but on UW Madison campus, like so many other campuses, a lot of the food access work is the blood, sweat, and tears of other students. Students are providing 99% of the meals on this campus, whether you're eating at a dining hall, whether you're eating at Food Recovery Network, which provides free meals to students, whether you're getting food from Open Seat. It's student labor that's providing this. And that's a lot of pressure on students. And come winter break time, when those students want to go home or go on vacation, it leaves food insecure students kind of in the dark and without resources, and it should not be on other students to provide that. So we kind of noticed this problem as student leaders, and me and a couple other folks from the student government, we began really pushing our administration to hire a basic needs case manager. And so that is a full-time staff member whose entire job is helping students access their basic needs. So one of the kind of strategies we use is we also did a food insecurity survey, and we got over 800 responses, and we used the Hope Temple Lab kind of metrics to create that survey. So we used that, and we found that UW-Madison was unfortunately like a lot of other campuses, and it had extremely high levels of food insecurity. Some of the things that stuck out to me from that survey was that 38% of students were skipping a meal at least once a month because of financial reasons, and that number jumped up to 50%, so 1 in 2 for students of color as well. So yeah, we kind of used that survey data, and we advocated for that position, and the university was able to find a donor to fund that position for the first 3 years. And they were just hired over the summer, and I got to work with them and help hire them, and they're an amazing individual. We kind of joke though that we've tasked this person to do way too much for one person because we had so many hopes and dreams for the role. But this person is getting in there, and they're working with students, and we're really excited to see where this role will go, and we'll have to continue to advocate for its extension beyond that 3-year donation as well. And then kind of along with that, I worked with some individuals up in the Basic Needs Financial Aid Office to launch the Basic Needs website, and that was a whole team of individuals. I was one of the students on that team, and that just goes back to that idea that, I think there's some statistic out there that of the students who are experiencing basic needs insecurity, 75% cite awareness of resources as the issue, as the number one issue. Not availability, not any of those things. It's knowing what's out there. And so the Basic Needs website was kind of a tool to help us tackle that, and also to centralize information and get campus partners working together to solve this issue of food insecurity and other basic needs insecurity.
Wow, that is incredible. I am in awe. And you must have felt so proud to see, the product of your work coming to life, simply from identifying a problem that you had also experienced and paying it forward in that respect. I think that is incredible. And yeah, it just warms my heart. I want to switch gears a little. Yeah, you're welcome. I want to switch gears kind of a little bit more to focus on the Open Seat, the campus food pantry. Um, I know it's entirely student run, which is really unique. And I'm just curious, what does that structure look like in practice? And do you notice any challenges or advantages of having a pantry completely led by students?
Yes, definitely. So there are four of us, and there are three undergraduate directors, we call them. I am the distribution director, so I order all of the food from the food bank. And then we also have our amazing graduate advisor. So she's a graduate student, and she kind of oversees the pantry operations as well. And I think some of the strengths of having an entirely student run team is that I would like to say, we're a very welcoming pantry. I know a lot of the people that shop at the pantry by name. I'll ask them about life and classes and stuff, and I'm friends with a lot of them too, which is super cool. And also, as a student who's experienced food insecurity, I used to shop at the pantry. I don't shop at the pantry anymore. But I can talk with students about like, oh, that one's not like that cereal's not very good. It kind of tastes like cardboard. I can't lie. But maybe if you make it into like a sweet treat or something, you put it in like a cereal bar, maybe it'll be better. So I like that we can like really casually talk with pantry shoppers, which I think makes it more welcoming. I think sometimes when you go into a place and there's some like adult who's like wearing a cardigan or whatever. Sorry, I wear cardigans, but like kind of they're just like on their laptop and they're just doing this. It can be a little intimidating. No shade to any other pantries, but anyways, I digress. But I will say one of the struggles, the really big struggles of running a student-run pantry is that it is really hard to be a student and to care so much about this project and have the responsibility of other families and students' emergency food access in your hands all the time. I think that it's comes up when, one of us, I had to like just show up to work sick one time because I was the only one who could drive the car, the university car, and I had to like leave my team when they only had like a few people to distribute 4,000 pounds of food to 150 families in 1 hour. And I was like, I gotta go. And I know that me leaving meant that my team was really going to struggle, and it was also going to impede access to food for other people. People had to wait in line a lot longer, and it was just a lot more disorganized. And I think that it's really hard when the university isn't saying, don't worry, it's okay, we can support students as well, we'll step in, we'll help you. And we just don't get that at UW-Madison. We're also entirely run by donations. There's not one university dollar that comes to our pantry. The student government pays for our staff, which is student dollars from our segregated fees, and we're funded by donations. And so there is not one instance of administration or university dollars or labor coming into the pantry. And I think that's really frustrating because it communicates this message that UW-Madison doesn't care about students' food access. It doesn't care about the food pantry because if, like, even if just one of us quit, for example, or one of us it's really hard when we graduate, but if one of us just got really sick or was like, I need to quit to focus on school, we might have to, like, close an extra day a week, which is really kind of scary and I think puts a lot of pressure on students. And I can definitely say that in the job I definitely experience some burnout sometimes, and it can be really hard to say, actually I need to take a step back so I continue this work that I love, but I need to step back right now. So there are definitely some challenges and we're working through them. We're hiring some more students, thankfully, because 4 students is too few. But yeah, it's always kind of a balancing act for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. I resonate with so much of what you say. Like, as someone, I worked at my college food pantry as an undergrad and graduate student, and now as like a staff member running a pantry. Like, as a staff member, I have a hard time keeping up with everything, and that's my full-time job to focus all of my energy on the pantry. So I can imagine for students who, of course, are students first, and you're taking care of your own academics and your own personal life, and then, like you say, really caring about the open seat and the work that you do with the food pantry. I can totally resonate with what you're talking about, that feeling of burnout sometimes, because it can feel like, and it is a lot to manage. Um, so thanks for, kind of breaking that down a little bit, because still I will say, like, at the universities I've worked at, there's still been, a student plus staff structure. So I was really curious to kind of hear more about, when it really is the students, leading the charge. Like, that is, slightly different, even though the feelings and the effects might be a little bit of the same.
Yeah, and I will say we have really high usership too. We've looked at other pantries and it's not like we're serving less students. I mean, I think this month alone we probably had 2,500 visits throughout the month, and that's not unique individuals. That is, people who are just one person accessing food, and they might come 8 times a month, for example. But that was like 2,500 times we welcome someone in the door, basically. Um, and we have 4 students. We work between 10 to 15 hours a week. So we have, but sometimes we can't. And so we have about one full-time staff member between all of us. And it's like, imagine having one full-time staff member serving 2,500 visits at a pantry and all the other things that encompass all that administrative stuff. And it's a lot. So I just want to preface that. It's not like we're just like not serving a lot of students. We are. So
Yeah, that kind of leads into my next question. I was curious what need on UW-Madison's campus looks like. Who are the types of students you serve? Like, for example, graduate versus undergraduate, international versus students who are domestic students. Like, what can you kind of break down? Do you have any information on that?
yeah. So we stopped doing specific demographic data about a year ago, but I definitely know from our previous data and from my experience, we serve primarily international students, comma, graduate students, and low income students. So yes. I would say like our typical person who's accessing the pantry is an international graduate student, but we have lots of non-international graduate students and stuff like that as well. Um, and we also support a lot of families too. So we have our second distribution location, which is at our Eagle Heights Community Center, and that's a UW housing location where it's a lot of like small apartments, and it's typically graduate students with their families. And so when we typically think of students, we kind of just think of the single student who's serving themselves when they visit a pantry. They might live with a roommate, but they're probably just accessing food for themselves. But at our Eagle Heights location, we're serving, sometimes people tell me they have like 5 or 6 individuals that they're serving, and the amount of food we can serve them doesn't really encompass that as well. So we're serving a lot of large families, and that can be really difficult. It's also, I'll offer a positive note. I really love attending Eagle Heights distribution because there are always kids running around. We always have juicy juices there, these mini juice boxes. I tried to stop ordering them a while ago because I was like, who really wants juice? And the families, they're like, where's the juice? Where's my juice?
Are those like small green juice boxes?
I'm pretty, like, they're like
Like,
apple, berry, and grape, and they're juicy juice.
yes, yes,
Yes.
those are really good. I'm not gonna lie.
No, they're so good. They're like pantry staple. But what always happens is we always have it's at a community center that we do our distribution, so people will bring their kids, and kids are always running around at distribution, which is sometimes like, it's really cute, but sometimes I'm like, guys, you're getting in my way. But kids will always just like come up and they'll just like, we have these juice like containers, and they'll just like swipe a juice and they'll run away, which is totally fine. But they like grab a juice and they're like, they run away because they're like playing while their parents are shopping, so it's kind of cute, but yeah.
I wanted to take some time to mention, you've spoken in previous work that you've done, you've spoken about the intersection between research and activism. And, I'm just curious, how do you see those two informing one another in your work, whether that's research slash data?
Definitely. So This is something that I'm continuing to explore and navigate, but I think, research for me as a first gen student kind of felt like this thing that was just like way up here, right? It was like, whoa, research is so mysterious. And, as part of doing that, survey that I did with it was just some of my friends and stuff, but we got really rigorous with it. I mean, we were using like proven metrics and we were like crunching the data and we were really looking and we were really interrogating what people were saying. There was a qualitative aspect to it as well. And I kind of, in that moment, kind of saw how research can really influence policy and advocacy. Some of the really interesting things that I had never thought about as part of that research project was the intersection between disability and food access or basic needs access. That wasn't something we asked about specifically, but in the open-ended responses, lots of people were citing that their disability makes it really difficult to access food because of transportation, or having mental health issues can make it really difficult to continuously access and cook food as well. And I think research has the ability to kind of open your eyes to experiences that are not your own. And as a kind of research activist, I might even, not myself, but research activism is a thing. I don't know if that's me yet. I haven't done enough research, but as taking part in a project of research activism, you can see how this research can really translate to real world effects. And I think I, as an individual, kind of struggle in my classes sometimes where I'm like, okay, but like, why does this matter? Or what are we going to do from here? And I think if someone is like relating to this, look into research activism, scholar activism, Paulo Freire, just there is, to be a good researcher, you have to be out in the world and doing stuff, and to be a good activist, you have to be able to critically analyze and dissect these problems. And so I think there's a really important intersection, and I've been kind of continuing to explore that intersection as well. And it's difficult. It's hard because, I'm working at the food pantry and I always want to put that first because it feels so immediate, but you also want to like get into the data and get into seeing what other people are doing and seeing what's going on in the world. And so it's definitely not easy, but I think it's really valuable.
Chloe, as you look back on your time at UW-Madison and think ahead to what's next, what essentially gives you hope about the future of student advocacy, or what advice would you give to other students who want to make change on their campus?
Okay, amazing. I think the first step is recognizing that you as an individual can enact change. You as a person, you as a student have every right to criticize the institutions around you and to make change. And I said as an individual, I just mean you as a person, but you definitely cannot act alone. And so I think, recognizing that within yourself, but then going out into the community and finding people with like experiences as you and people who are passionate about what you're passionate about can be really empowering. And it's not always easy, I would say. I think it takes a lot of strength. And what I always say, like, have to remind myself and want to share with other student activists is that sometimes you have to take a step back so that when you're ready, you can continue this important work. Because if you just push and push and push yourself, you're going to burn out and then you won't be able to do that work that you're so passionate about anymore. But finding that community on campus, finding that space on campus where you feel really empowered, you feel cared for, can be really honestly like magical. And then just keep on pushing and keep interrogating those systems that are around you that you might have accepted or others might have accepted, but stepping up and saying, that's not okay and I want to do something about that can be really great.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your story and your advocacy with us, with me, with listeners. I just really appreciate your leadership and your authentic perspective. Like this was truly such a great conversation. And I was really inspired by hearing everything that is happening at UW-Madison's campus. much to the credit of your leadership and your peers on campus. So, again, we've been speaking with Chloe Shomo, student advocate and leader with the Open Seat Food Pantry and Associated Students of Madison. Thanks for being part of the conversation, Chloe.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
So that wraps up this week's episode of the Student Impact Report. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at SBNC_USA for updates. And you can also catch our episodes on Spotify and YouTube. See you next time.